Welcome to number 65, meeting number 65 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. Start with just a few reminders. Of course, we're meeting in hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website, and of course, the webcast only shows those who are speaking, and screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Couple changes here today at committee. We have Arnold Viersen subbing in for Warren Steinley, and we have Mr. Shields, who's also here for Ms. Rood. So welcome to both of you. And Mr. McDonald from Prince Edward Island subbing in for Mr. Turnbull. So great to see you as well. No stranger to the Agriculture Committee. Just a couple reminders, colleagues, off the hop. We're looking for recommendations in relation to the conversation we've had on bee policy by next Monday so that we can incorporate that into the report. The analysts have told me some of you have already shared that, so if you've already shared it, don't feel the need to reshare. But if you haven't said something on this or you want to make sure something's there, please do so by Monday. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motions adopted by the committee on Monday, January 31st, 2022, Wednesday, October 5th, 2022, and Monday, April 17th, 2023, the committee is resuming its study on environmental contribution of agriculture. And of course, as I mentioned, today we're talking about the topic of bee mortality. And I'd like to thank our witnesses. Last time, a few weeks ago, we tried to have you in. We had some real technical difficulties virtually. Great to see you here in person. Thank you. And sorry we had to cut that meeting short. But from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency today, we have Dr. Nancy Ryu, who is the Senior Director and Deputy Chief Veterinary Officer. We also have Dr. Parthi Muthu Kumar Sami. I think I got it relatively right, sir. Executive Director, International Programs Directorate. From the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food, Dr. Stephen Pernell, I think is how I pronounce it. Did I get it right, Pernell? Oh, sorry, you're online. There he is. It looks like it's okay. So he'll be joining us virtually. From the Department of Health, Dr. Connie Hart, who is the Senior Science Advisor, Environmental Assessment Directorate, Pest Management Regulatory Agency. Ms. Hart, certainly PMRA does really important work and always really important for our agriculture sector, so thank you for being here. And also joining you is Frederick Bissonnette, Acting Executive Director of PMRA. So welcome to the committee. From the American Beekeeping Federation, we have Daniel Winter, who is the president, joining us online. Thank you, Daniel, for joining. And from the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, we have Ted McKinney, who is the Chief Executive Officer. Mr. McKinney, thank you so much for joining us and being able to give us a perspective outside of Canada. So we're going to allow for 5 minutes for each organization or individual to provide opening statements, and then we're going to get right to questions. I'm going to start with the Canadian Food and Inspection Agency for up to 5 minutes. Over to you.
Chairman, and good afternoon. The CFI is pleased to be invited here today to share our knowledge and regulatory perspectives. The CFI is a science-based regulatory agency whose mandate is the safeguarding of plant, animal, and food, which enhances the health and well-being of Canada's people, environment, and economy. The CFI fully recognizes that bee populations are important for the health and vitality of the Canadian agriculture sector. Federal and provincial jurisdictions share responsibility for managing bee health in Canada. The CFI works at the national level, first by designating certain bee diseases as regulated and reportable diseases, which means that specific disease control measures have to be applied for their control. Second, by minimizing the risks of introducing bee diseases into Canada through the control of importations. And third, by providing guidance to the bee industry through the National Bee Farm-Level Biosecurity Standard. The provincial governments help to maintain bee health within their jurisdiction by administering bee health management programs and regulating interprovincial movement of bees to minimize the spread of bee diseases and pests. Canada has always relied on strict science-based import measures to safeguard our borders from the introduction of diseases and pests. Comprehensive import risk assessments, guided by the methodology of the World Organization of Animal Health, are conducted by CFIA science experts before imports of bees are permitted from any country. The risk assessments are peer-reviewed by members of the Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists, an independent organization consisting of academia, researchers, and federal and provincial apiculturists. We then consider identifying, developing, and implementing possible options for risk management. Bee diseases and pests spread between countries through the international trade of bees, especially with respect to package bees. A package of bees poses higher risk than queen bees and usually weighs 2 to 3 pounds and contains about 8,000 to 12,000 bees. On the other hand, honeybee queens can be individually inspected for health and presence of pests before importation into Canada and therefore possess lower risk than honeybee packages. Based on science-based risk assessments, Canada currently allows for import of honeybee queens from the United States, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Denmark, Italy, Ukraine, and Malta. Due to higher risks, honeybee packages are only permitted for import from Chile, Australia, New Zealand, and more recently from Italy and Ukraine. I'll now share some information on the current situation with the importation of honeybees from the United States. Canada closed its border to U.S. honeybees in 1987 due to reports of varroa mites and tracheal mites in the United States. The CFIA reassessed the situation in 1994, 2003, and 2013. Although the last risk assessment was conducted in 2013, CFIA on an ongoing basis reviews new scientific information on Canadian and U.S. honeybee health, and if any significant new information warrants a risk assessment, CFIA would initiate another risk assessment. Due to diverse views among experts and stakeholders on whether sufficient new information is available or not, CFIA took an initiative between July and October 2022 to formally request a call for submission of any new scientific information regarding honeybee health in Canada and the United States. The CFIA is currently evaluating all submissions received and remains open to receiving additional submissions. If sufficient new evidence is available that would warrant a new risk assessment, CFIA will proceed with a new risk assessment. At that time, CFIA will also review any science-based risk mitigation protocols that could mitigate any risk. The CFIA continues to engage with the Canadian Honey Council, the United States Department of Agriculture, provincial governments, apiculturists, and open to receiving information from other stakeholders and members of the industry on the import of honeybees. However, CFIA's first and primary responsibility is the safeguarding of plant and the animal health and food safety. Thank you again for this opportunity to provide the CFIA's perspective on bee health in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We'll now turn to PMRA for up to 5 minutes, please. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon. My name is Frédéric Bissonnette. I'm the Acting Executive Director at Health Canada's Pest Management Regulatory Agency, or PMRA. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're meeting today in Ottawa, Ontario, which is a traditional unceded territory of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin people. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to the committee about PMRA's role in protecting bee health. I'm joined today by Dr. Connie Hart, a Senior Science Advisor in the Environmental Assessment Directorate, who has over 20 years of experience in environmental risk assessment, including expertise in assessing risk of pesticide to bees. PMRA is a federal authority responsible for the regulation of pesticides in Canada. Our mandate under the Pest Control Products Act is to prevent unacceptable risk to individuals and the environment from the use of pest control products. Pesticide manufacturers apply to Health Canada to register new pesticide or to add new uses. Our role is to conduct thorough, science-based risk and value assessment of these pesticides before they can be registered for use in Canada. PMRA also monitors and reassesses pesticides after they've been registered. We conduct periodic reevaluation of pesticide using the most current science and risk assessment protocols, and we conduct special reviews of pesticide where there is reasonable ground to believe that the value or risk of their uses are unacceptable. We recognize the importance of bee health for agriculture in our society. The health of pollinators is complex and can be affected by many factors, including parasites and pathogens, habitat loss, food supply issues, queen bee quality, exposure to pesticides, general hive management, and weather. L'ARLA travaille avec les principales parties.
The PMRA works with key stakeholders and our provincial counterparts on issues related to bee health and pesticides. We collaborate with other pesticide regulators domestically and internationally to improve our risk assessments and management. PMRA's incident reporting program allows anyone to report suspected pesticide-related effects on people or the environment, including effects on bees. Pesticide registrants are required to report incidents involving their products to PMRA. This allows us to monitor for unforeseen risks once pesticides are in use. In 2012, PMRA began receiving large numbers of incident reports about bee deaths, colony losses, and abnormal behavior. An investigation into the causes of these incidents found that dust from the planting of neonicotinoid treated seed was likely adversely impacting nearby bee colonies. Health Canada, in collaboration with many stakeholders, implemented risk reduction measures to minimize pesticide exposure to bees. With these risk mitigations in place, Health Canada saw a significant decrease in the number of incidents reported. In 2014, PMRA published a pesticide risk assessment framework for bees, developed in cooperation with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. This framework is now used in all assessments conducted in Canada and the United States where bees may be exposed to pesticides. It was applied in the reevaluations of 3 neonicotinoid pesticides completed in 2019. These assessments were based on a review of hundreds of open literature and pesticide companies submitted studies that assessed risks to bee colonies, including overwinter mortality. The reevaluation of neonicotinoids resulted in decisions by PMRA to further mitigate potential risks to bees. As a result of these assessments, PMRA put in place major changes to product registrations. This included cancellation of a number of pesticide uses.
Spring of 2022, high honeybee and overwintering losses were reported from Alberta, Quebec, Ontario, Manitoba, and other provinces. The Canadian Association of Professional Apiculturists reported that the most cited cause of colony loss was ineffective control of varroa mites on bees, which could lead to the loss of the colonies. So in addition to mitigating risk to bees from pesticide use, PMRA is also responsible for decision regarding registration of pest control products to protect honeybees, including products used to control varroa mites. PMRA has and continues to carefully monitor and consider the impact of pesticide on bee health. Our intent is to be proactive in our protection of bees and to take timely action where warranted. Again, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and for inviting PMRA to participate in this important discussion today. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'll now turn to the American Beekeeping Federation, Mr. Winter, and I am coming to the National Association next. So, Mr. McKinney, if you could just make sure your camera's on when we get to you, that would be lovely. Thank you. But, Mr. Winter, over to you for up to 5 minutes.
Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Dan Winter. I'm a second-generation commercial beekeeper from New York State. I do both commercial crop pollination and honey production. Currently, I am president of the American Beekeeping Federation, and I'm also on the New York State Apiary Industry Advisory Committee. And most recently, I was nominated onto the National Honey Board. I'd like to take a minute to talk about honeybee mortality in the United States in general. Most of the information is available from the Bee Informed Partnership. They have a 16-year mortality average that they've been working on with the USDA. That's available at beeinformed.org website. The Bee Informed Partnerships managed honeybee loss estimates from April of 2020 to April of 2021. In the United States, beekeepers lost about 45.5%. You know, these are very unsustainable levels of mortality, as I'm sure you already know in Canada. These rates continue to rise even despite a 50-state pollinator protection plan that went into effect under President Barack Obama, where all 50 states in the United States were required to develop a pollinator protection plan in order to help alleviate honeybee losses. Now, the APF contributes managed pollinator mortality to be directly related to 3 main factors, and that would be pests and parasites, nutrition, and problems associated with agrochemicals and synergistic problems when honeybees mix these contaminated pollens within the beehives. Now, a lot of chemicals are studied on an individual basis. Dr. Diana Cox Foster from the ARS lab in Utah has done a lot of studies on the synergistic problems with adjuvants and things like that that are added to chemicals when they're mixed together. Now, as you know, honeybees bring pollen into the beehive, and they mix the pollens together into a thing called bee bread, in which they feed their larvae. the bee bread can contain several different chemicals, and rarely are these chemicals studied together within the beehive. And I think that's where a lot of a lot of the testing and chemical residue studies have actually fallen short. I don't think that they're taking into account that the bees themselves are mixing the chemicals within the hives. And I think that working toward more sustainable agriculture in the future is one of the only ways that we're going to alleviate pollinator losses. And we have to remember too that what's good for managed pollinators is also good for native pollinators. So this will be a win-win across the board if we can start to develop and look at how these chemicals affect each other within the beehive, and stop looking at individual chemicals as being a huge problem within the beehive. Now, another pest we have is the Tropal Alaps mite. Now, that is currently in Asia and has not been a problem in North America. If that mite was to be imported into Canada or into the U.S. via packages or things like that, the Tropal Alaps mite breeds 3 times faster than the current Varroa mite. And therefore, honey production would sink to near nothing because beekeepers would have to treat their colonies constantly to be able to keep up with commercial pollination demands. Therefore, we need to be proactive and not reactive when it comes to the Tropal Alaps mite. We really don't want to see that get into North America. And there's it's been brought to the American Beekeeping Federation's to our attention that Canada is importing some packages from some questionable areas. Now, again, it's we just worry about the commercial end of pollination and how that will affect our industry and our food resources later. We would strongly like the Canadian Parliament to possibly consider importing packages from the United States because they are much lower risk, and would entertain the fact and help to work on possible ways that we could make that happen so that our risk to commercial pollination in the United States and in Canada is drastically reduced. The way we move bees around North America, a mite like that would spread so fast it would be catastrophic to our industry. So we really need to follow the science on this. Look at Dr. Samuel Ramsey's studies in Asia about this mite, and try to be proactive and try to keep it out of North America. Thank you very much for your time, and we really appreciate you inviting the American Beekeeping Federation to these hearings. Thank you.
Well, we certainly appreciate you making the time for us, Mr. Winter. Thank you for your opening statement. We'll now turn to Mr. McKinney, and then following that, colleagues, we'll turn it over to questions. Over to you, Mr. McKinney.
Yes, well, good afternoon, and thank you, Chair Blois, and also to your Vice Chairs Barlow and Perron for the invitation to speak today. I'm Ted McKinney, very fortunate to serve as the CEO of the National Association of State Departments of Agriculture, or NASDA. Who are we? We represent the commissioners, secretaries, and directors. These would be direct equivalents to your ministers of ag from your provinces, and they represent all 50 states and 4 international territories. Many of you are aware, but we're responsible for a wide range of programs, including food safety, conservation, environmental protection, also serving as a co-regulator with US EPA and in some cases USDA on certain programs. Bee health is oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes a part of our programs. We have a strong relationship with your provincial ministers. In fact, here coming up in a month or two, it will be the 32nd consecutive year in Saskatchewan for the Trinational Agricultural Accord, where we address cross-border issues such as regulatory harmonization, animal plant health, and I suspect bee health as well. Let me speak to bee health. First, it's critical to plant reproduction. You know that. 3/4 of the world's flowering plants and about 35% of the world's food crops depend on animal pollinators to reproduce. And the health of these species is critical to our agriculture as it is yours in many cases, not just for agriculture, but food security and the overall economy. The Varroa mite, you've heard referenced before, it is a significant threat. It's a clear and present danger right now, facing health, honey production, and pollination services. Interestingly, the Varroa mite's full name is Varroa destructor, and it is perhaps aptly named parasite because it's a plague for honeybees. USDA cites the Varroa mite incites more damage and higher economic costs than all other agricultural diseases, and that's quite a claim, I might add. Before the widespread introduction of Varroa mites, beekeepers managed more than 3 million colonies for crop pollination, and their winter losses were about 10 to 15%, typically. Today, those losses are averaging more than 40%, reflecting what was just shared by Mr. Winter. Today, animal colonies are averaging about 40%. What beekeepers truly need are more tools in the toolbox. You'll hear that theme from us to provide long-term solutions to the Varroa mites and other parasitic mites that may arrive. For commercial beekeepers, there's only 3 treatments available to combat Varroa mites. These treatments are generally effective. However, this short list has not changed in more than a decade. In short, we're not adding new tools to the new toolbox. So there are some folk remedies out there, and they have varying levels of success, but certainly are far less consistent than these primary 3 treatments, and all of them involve more labor and cost to apply it. So the long-term solution to combating these parasitic mites begins with funding additional research that would protect honeybee hives from the parasitic mites and funding more research, something that we're advocating for in our Farm Bill, and hope that you all as well in your parliament and your departments. NASDA recognizes that a risk-based regulatory process is a fundamental pillar of future success. It's what we've long applied for and support. Specifically, we support the science-based regs of pesticides by EPA under our FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. So, in addition, you have my full appendix that explains the EPA process in assessing these risks. A bit of international perspective, given my current and former role, ag throughout North America faces a lot of challenges, and they are significant. We enjoy tremendous opportunities, though, as well. And it's critical that we as North America Trading Bloc elevate the promotion of science-based decision-making regarding international regulation of sanitary, phytosanitary measures. The fundamental objectives of this are under attack, most notably by our friends in the European Union under their Green Deal, more specifically, their farm-to-fork policies. We at NASDA see this as a clear and present danger. These policies seek to demonize the technological advancements we've made in agriculture through improved chemistries and biotechnologies, and if enacted, these policies can and do threaten our ability to produce sufficient food, fiber to support the world's population, which just recently, as you know, passed 8 billion. So as leaders of Canadian agriculture, we hope this committee will reject calls for scientifically dubious policies promoted by the EU, in some cases a few other countries, and embrace the technologies that have made our agricultural production so successful, not only in terms of food and feed, quality, quantity, but also safety, and likewise in terms of our significant environmental achievements. In conclusion, pollinator health, especially bee health, is critical because of the role they play in plant reproduction across the globe in producing food, fuel, and fiber. We stand ready working with you. And I might say that some of these comments come as my own experience working on a farm with pesticides over my lifetime. So thank you for the opportunity to join you on this occasion.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKinney. We'll now turn it over to questions. Mr. Barlow, up to 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for being here. I want to start with the PMRA. And this first question may not sound like it deals with bees, but I'll get there. Certainly with the assessment of lambda-cy by the PMRA has caused a lot of concern within the agriculture sector. We have the ag ministers in Saskatchewan and Alberta asking for that decision to be reevaluated, as it certainly doesn't seem to make sense that it's approved for crops that are going to be used for human consumption, but not for crops that are going to go to livestock feed. To me, there's clearly an error in that decision. Has there been a decision by PMRA to do a reassessment of its delabeling of lambda-cy?
So thank you for the question. So maybe a bit of a history on Lambda cyhalothrin. So there was a reevaluation that happened. The first consultation, we were basically proposing to cancel all uses. So we sought more information, as we typically do during a consultation, and we also asked the company to prioritize the use. The risk was a dietary in nature, so like children in particular, so the amount that's consumed every day or over a lifetime. And the company prioritized the list of crops that would make it to the label, like the first one, if it passes, we add it, then we, so on and so forth. The company did not identify feed as a priority, hence the decision that was basically allowed more uses on the label, but the feed did not make it because the company did not identify it as a priority for them. Now, that being said, the company has now provided us with an application to revisit the decision with new information, and we're in the middle of reviewing that information.
Now, the reason that I'm going to get to the bee issue here is there are, when it comes to Matador and Silencer, those key the key labels of Lambda Cy, there are no other comparable products out there that are going to deal with grasshoppers, beetles, but also honeybees. According to the Canadian Beekeepers Association, any other products are actually more harmful to bees, who are, if Matador is used properly, it does not harm bees. Was the impact on bees taken into consideration by PMRA when this decision was made?
So first, all decisions on pesticide are based on that product. First and foremost, it has to have acceptable value. It has to have acceptable risk. If it doesn't, that's it. Now, every product that is registered goes through a risk assessment, and it's only going to be registered if found acceptable. So the bees would have been considered when the alternative were registered. That being said, I've talked to some of the growers myself. There's a product, chlorantraniliprole, that is currently available that they find works, and my understanding is that they secured stocks for the coming growing season.
Are you reviewing the application to reevaluate Lambda Cy? Any timeline on when that will be done? We've obviously lost this season, and I can't overstate this enough. With the lack of rainfall we've had in Western Canada this year, there's a real concern of grasshoppers and beetles being a major problem. Any timeline you can give me on when this will be done? I think it's pretty clear that this decision will go that this product can come back. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but when will this happen?
Prioritize the review, and we're hoping that we'll be able to get it, like the decision, out in time for the next growing season.
Thank you. Now, CFIA now, you've allowed queen bees to be imported from areas of the United States for many decades. What is the decision between allowing queen bees to be imported from those areas but not allowing live packaged bees?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The risk posed by queen bees and packaged bees are totally different. Queen bees are single bees with few helpers that are exported, that are able to be inspected and are able to be certified as freedom from pest, disease, and parasites because it's very few number. However, packaged bees, like I mentioned in my opening statement, are about a kilogram in size, in weight, and also includes 8,000 to 12,000 bees. So the risk parameters are different. When we did the risk assessment in 2003, at that time, we were able to allow queen bees to come to be imported from the United States, but not packaged bees because the risk is higher.
Now, you've mentioned in your opening statement that we're also allowing the importation of bees from Ukraine. The United States has not allowed bees to be imported from Ukraine. Obviously, there's some issues going on with the invasion, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. How was that assessment done, and why are we not following a similar decision to one of our most important trading partners who also obviously has concerns about importing these bees from Ukraine where Canada does not?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our assessment, our decision to allow imports of packaged bees from Ukraine was made after an extensive risk assessment that was conducted on Ukraine and their control programs, their surveillance programs, their disease prevalence, a number of other scientific parameters. So
just one really quick question then to Mr. Winter of the American Beekeeping Federation. Would you agree with that assessment that it makes there shouldn't be a concern between importing queen bees and packaged live bees from the United States into Canada?
You know, I think some of the older risk assessments are outdated, and therefore I think I don't think that a current risk assessment would show the same problems as the risk assessment from 10 years ago. So I really think that, I think that it would be, fairly safe for Canada to import packages from the United States. And I think that we've had meetings within USDA and places like that to possibly explore, regulations that would indeed let packages come into Canada if Canada would, like to go into talks and entertain how we could possibly make that happen. I think it's important.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Winter. Thank you, Mr. Barlow. Now we have Mr. Drouin for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et je tiens à remercier mes...
Thank you very much. I'd like to also thank all of the witnesses for being here today.
You've identified significant new scientific information. I'm just trying to understand, how does CFIA label significant new information when we talk about, for instance, if we're allowed to send package B from south to north? Because I think that's part of the reason as to why we're here, and it's just, and I don't know the answer, so I'm asking honestly. How do you say this is significant new information versus this is not significant new information?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The risk assessment looks at 4 hazards from a bee health perspective. The 4 of them are small hive beetle, amitraz resistance, varroa mites, oxytetracycline resistant American fall brood, and Africanized bees. So it is a scientific process where it assigns risk to each of those hazards. So if the risk level changes as a result of new scientific information that is available on surveillance, on control measures, on mitigation measures, that will allow us to re-evaluate and re-quantify the risks that are there. It is based on a World Organization of Animal Health process, the risk assessment itself. So it is a scientific process where you can say there is a significant new information that changes our assessment from previous 2013 or not.
Okay, so, and I'll look at my colleague, Mr. McGregor, who's in BC. I've certainly been to his province. We know there's a road there's 2 roads. One's in the U.S., one's in Canada. There's farmland right there. The bees aren't going to stop at CBSA and say, I need to get in in order to pollinate or get some food. So how do we measure that risk versus other risks that you've certainly identified, and how do we move away from saying no to managing risk properly in terms of saying there's a lack in the Canadian market? We know that package bees, we're going through to other continents. And I'll be honest with you, I have an issue that we're going to other continents, but yet we can't go to the North American continent, especially the Northern American continent, where we have an artificial political, Canada, U.S., I get it, but bees don't get it. So how do we manage this risk, and how do we communicate it if there's really an issue? And then you're basing this on 2013 science, and I'm having a hard time saying since 2013, since 10 years ago, we haven't had a significant update on science information in order for us to not only import queens, but import package bees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will make 2 quick comments. First, in terms of bees flying over from across the border, bees only fly relatively short distances, 1 to 5 kilometers, and they are bound to their hives, so they go back to their hives. The situation does not pose the same risk as the intentional introduction of 8,000 to 12,000 bees coming in packages and are introduced in the honey production areas. So the risks are very, very different, and that's why...
But respectfully, in Abbotsford region, there's... Whether you put a beehive in the U.S. or in Canada, it's the same thing. They're very close. So are we monitoring this particular the region in order to say that this let's treat this as a pilot project. Let's look at this particular region, because from my understanding, there's absolutely no difference. I mean, there's a fence. There's no net that goes up thousands of kilometers again. And I know that bees are traveling 1 kilometer to 5 kilometers away from the beehive, but in that particular region, I know for a fact that they're pollinating in blueberry harvests, and they're coming back to the U.S. So I'm having a hard time explaining this to Canadians, in that particular region and who are looking for whether it's their honeybees or pollinators, I'm just having a hard time explaining that. And then that to me, if we're basing this on 2013 science, then are we actually looking at this particular region, which is a perfect area to say that bees, are actually traveling 1 kilometer back and forth in the border, and they're not checking into CBSA. I could tell you, as you know, right? And I'm not trying to dumb down the conversation. I'm just trying to get the scientific basis as to why we're still refusing packaged bees from northern states to Canada.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Although our risk assessment was done in 2013, we continually review any new publications that's coming out, any new surveillance reports that's coming out, any new science that's coming out to continually evaluate to see if there's any significant changes that would warrant a risk assessment. Like also I mentioned in my opening remarks that CFIA has formally requested, solicited, called for new information and scientific information from a number of stakeholders, which we have received, and we are currently reviewing those. So in the next few weeks, we will make a decision whether we would go ahead with another risk assessment or not. Thank you.
I want to ask my American friends on the other side. Obviously, there's been an opening. They've openly asked for information. Do we? And I've got about 20 seconds. Have you provided some information to CFIA up in Canada about the new scientific data that's may be available? Well, there's two American. Whomever wants to
Mr.
jump
Winter
in.
or Mr. McKinney, any response to Mr. Joanne? Any information sharing that has happened with the United States to our regulators here in Canada that you know of?
There's none that I know of. Certainly, we're more than willing to work through USDA and into Canada. Any science we have is certainly, we can make available, to you. I think it's important to understand too, and I agree with you completely. The bees can fly right across the St. Lawrence Seaway. I'm from northern New York myself, so I understand, what you're saying, and I think it's important to understand that the risk assessment from 10 years ago does not contain the Tropicalaps mite in Asia. Where you're importing bees from is the most important thing to recognize. A hive beetle or Africanized bees, they will have severe trouble in the freezing climates in Canada. So, I don't think they're actually a huge issue.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. We're at time, unfortunately. I want to thank my good friend, Mr. Parent, because he thankfully tabled our main estimates today on my behalf so we could get started. So thank you, Mr. Parent. You have 6 minutes. I might even give you a few extra seconds for that good deed. There you go.
Avoir su que ça prenait ça, Monsieur le Président, j'aurais déposé des...
Had I known that that's all it took, I would have tabled reports even sooner. Thank you very much, witnesses, for being here today. I will continue with people from PMRA. When you say that you are reviewing the standards constantly with regards to bees coming from the United States, I have some questions. With the queen bees, there have been no issues with regards to the import, and you say that it's because you can inspect those packages. But what is the difference between a package of 8,000 bees coming from the U.S. or a package of 8,000 bees coming from the Ukraine? Can you not inspect those as well? Is the question for myself? With regards to inspection, we do have a very rigorous process, and risk evaluation is evaluated according to information we get from programs in place, the information from the company that we're importing from, and so on. With the Ukraine, we have had many discussions. There is scientific evidence that allows us to ensure that the bees and the packages were adequate, and they also provided us with forms that were filled in order to meet the standards. So with regards to bee imports, there are competent veterinarians who attest that these bees are coming from zones that are free of danger. Is that possible to have that from imports from the United States? When we did the risk analysis for bee packages coming from the United States, well, right now there are no mitigation measures that allow us to reduce the risk to an acceptable level. And so you're saying that there could be an eventual review of this measure? Yes, and since the bees can fly, this situation does not present the same risk of introduction. You can compare, for example, the introduction of a big hive that was introduced intentionally. It's not the same as when it's not been introduced intentionally. Of course, depending on the number of bees, it doesn't have the same level of risk. Something else that's been mentioned is that it's important to restrict the import of bees from certain zones according to their climate. The African gene, for example, has been brought up because it doesn't resist to the cold as much. There are also a lot of losses during transportation, and maybe if it's coming from the United States, transportation might be shorter. Do you have any data as to losses due to transportation, and what can we do? I think that is a question that the Department of Agriculture might be able to answer. Perhaps Mr. Stephen could answer. Mr. Pernal? Whoever could answer. If anyone can answer. Mr. Stephen? Mr. Pernal?
Correctly, what are the losses for long-distance transport from, let's say, New Zealand or Australia compared to the U.S.? Comparatively, there'd be lower risk coming from a shorter distance, but I will also point out that Canada has successfully imported bees from Australia and New Zealand for decades now, and generally those supply chains are quite good in bringing in packages. Occasionally, there can be losses that are absorbed by the providers, but inherently, transporting bees at shorter distances are less risky, but we have successfully worked with suppliers, or the Canadian beekeeping industry has worked with suppliers in overseas locations to very successfully transport bees from other continents.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Back to products and finding equivalence. Epivar, it took 6 years to approve it, even though it was used elsewhere. It seems like the processing time is quite long. Mr. Barlow mentioned earlier a few products that it might be good to revise. Are there any measures taken to reduce the delays with regards to finding a similar product without mitigating risks? We do have performance standards that are published. 95% of those goals are reached. It can take 2 years. Changing the label can take 9 months. It really depends on the scientific evidence. We're closely with the Americans, and our standards are usually aligned with the American industry. Only 10 seconds left, so maybe during the next round I will give you more time. Mr. McGregor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for joining us today. I'd like to start my questioning with the CFIA, and it's again trying to get into the specifics on how you conduct your risk assessment. So when you're trusting a lot of the information you receive from an authorized veterinarian who can provide some assurance that the bees or where the bees are coming from are free from disease. But is there an acceptable level of disease? Like if you were to look at, say, a package of bees that were coming in, and you said it could be in the neighborhood of 8,000 to 12,000 bees, if one bee were to show, a problem having a mite or a disease, like I guess what's the percentages you're looking for, which is an acceptable risk? I just wanted you to walk the committee through some of the specifics of how you arrived at these conclusions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The risk assessment is not based on individual packages, based on the entire system that the country has in place, including their veterinary infrastructure, including their surveillance, including research, including control measures for bee movements, the disease prevalence of any disease that we are concerned about, and also reporting. So every country and national competent authority we call as obligations under the World Trade Organization, SPS agreement, but also under the World Organization for Animal Health, to have certain measures in place to protect their bee health, but also when they export and certify that these bees are safe, they have to meet certain parameters. So the risk assessment, it's based on a number of scientific parameters that I mentioned. And once we are satisfied that with all the control measures that are in place, then we look at how we can permit imports from those countries. We also have conducted audits in other countries to go on site and evaluate for ourselves the measures that have been conveyed to us is actually in place. So there's a number of measures in place to ensure that the bees we import are safe and also are free of diseases, pests, and parasites.
So that is your baseline. It has to be absolutely free of disease and pests. That is the only acceptable metric. There's not any kind of variance allowed. Okay. Just thank you for that. To the PMRA, it has been reported that with some of the chemicals that are used to control mites, some of those mites are now showing resistance. When that begins to happen with a well-known chemical which has been successful, it's kind of like an evolutionary arms race. That's just simply what happens. When a pest, such as a mite, begins to exhibit those kinds of traits, where they are steadily becoming more resistant to a long-accepted type of chemical treatment, like when PMRA is doing its assessments of approved treatments, are you looking at the safe rate of application and whether you have to reassess whether more has to be used, or do you ever consider if we continue using this chemical, we're going to start doing more harm than good? How does this factor into your long-term thinking?
Yeah, so part of the assessment includes a consideration of the potential to develop resistance. We do look at the rate, the frequency. It has to be a rate that works, so it's not too much, but also not so little that it could actually accelerate the types of, it's biology, resistance will happen. It's inevitable to a point, but we do consider it. In terms of the rate, the company, if the rate's no longer sufficient, they can always reapply and seek an increase, and then we'll look at it from all the different aspects, human health, environment, and value to see if it's necessary. But these processes are driven by industry. We can't go in and change a label except if it's to add mitigation measures and that sort of thing.
Okay, so you're depending on a company to come back to you to say that we are noticing resistance with our product. We now have to ask for a stronger rate of application. But do you ever proactively go out into the field to, check up on a company to see if it's living up to its standards and so on?
So the growers will usually be in contact with a company to flag such issues, and they will let us know of these things, and sometimes that's being considered in terms of timeline. If something is really pressing, we might be considering emergency registration. We have a process. I don't think resistance is usually a factor for emergency registration, but it is an option. Accelerated timeline if there's really pressing issues. So it's working really with all the stakeholders, but ourselves, we can't really go, as a regulator, it would be a bit awkward for us to seek a registrant to come add a product to the market. Usually the growers will do that, sometimes in collaboration with Agriculture Canada.
And with, I'll cite one that is being used. I guess it's called Amitraz. So are you currently looking at the resistance that's growing to that particular product, or are you awaiting initiation by the company that sells it?
Resistance to Amitraz. We're not necessarily proactively talking to the company. We pretty much have all the active ingredients that are registered elsewhere in the world right now, but there is some biotech development, some companies are developing new types of products that are doing actually research to see if they would work, and when they come and talk to us, we obviously consider the current situation, but obviously everything needs to pass the risk assessment.
Do you have anything from the CFIA's perspective?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And certainly, Amitraz-resistant varroa mite is one of our hazards, one of our concerns that we include when we do the risk assessment. So when there is varroa resistance in another country that wants to export to Canada, certainly CFIA will not be looking at that from a risk assessment perspective because it introduces Varroa resistance to Canada. We already heard from the committee that there's very few treatment products available for Varroa mites, and we don't want to introduce any resistance into the Canadian population, depopulation through importation.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Mr. Viersen, 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Mr. Winter, I imagine you, being from New York State, you're close to Canada. I'm just wondering if you have a relationship with Canadian beekeepers and if there is any difference in the kinds of diseases and threats that we deal with on our side of the border compared to where you're operating.
Well, the American Beekeeping Federation, we have several members that are Canadian beekeepers, so they come down to our annual convention every year. And for the most part, most of the pests, I think, are already in Canada that are in that risk assessment. It is my understanding anyway. Things like Varroa resistance are very minor. If the Tropicalaps mite, and I can't stress that enough, if that comes to North America, we are in big trouble. So, I think that's the most important thing to look at right now. Dr. Frank Rinkovic from the USDA lab in Baton Rouge has some great studies on Amitraz resistance. If, I'm sure you can look those up online. Some of those studies are, they're all public information. I urge you to take a look at those because there is Amitraz resistance, and I think it's everywhere.
Mr. Winter, would you recommend a North America bee strategy?
I would. I think we should work together, share science, and see if we can make this happen. Obviously being proactive is far better than being reactive. If we get into a situation where we have to react to Tropicalaps mite, it's going to be catastrophic for our industry.
Thank you. Mr. Bissonnette, we had several beekeeping associations, beekeepers at this committee earlier this year, and one of the things that they were frustrated with was they tell me that there is a way to deal with the mites that's not approved yet. Are you familiar with this? Have you seen this testimony, and what's the holdup?
I've read the transcripts, and I believe it's a product. We have a product with the same active ingredient, but not that particular one. The company obviously needs to come to seek a registration, and then we would do a risk assessment. But Connie, anything to add on your end?
Yeah, I don't think we have received a submission for registering that at this point. I think there may have been discussions and pre-submission consultations, but we have not received the application for that product to register.
Can you name the product? What's the active ingredient that we're dealing with? Because the
product that was raised in one of the previous hearings, it was about an application method for I think it was oxalic acid, a different way of applying it. And I believe that's what you're referring to.
Okay.
And I could turn this over to Steve Purnell at AFC, who would be more familiar with developments in that area.
Okay. Thank you. Canadian Food Inspection Agency, is there a significant, from your perspective, is there a significant difference in the disease profile of North America or of America versus Canada? We hear from we've heard from beekeepers, and they're saying the disease profile, the diseases that they're dealing with in North Dakota are the same as the diseases we're dealing with in northern Alberta. It doesn't make sense that we can't take the bees from one place to the other because there's no differences in the way that we're keeping bees and in the diseases we're fighting. Could you talk a little bit about that?
We conducted did demonstrate there is a different level of risk and the different level of disease prevalence between Canada and U.S. That is the basis of the risk assessment and the decision to restrict import of packaged bees into Canada.
Is there a disease that the Americans have that we don't
have? For
have?
example, the Americans have Africanized bees in California, and it's moving north every year. We don't have Africanized bees in Canada. Africanized bees, as you know, it has undesirable traits like has more aggressive swans.
But Africanized bees is not a disease.
It is a pest that we are concerned about, and in terms of small hive beetle, for example, it's another parasite that's present widely in the U.S. It's only sporadic or in localized areas in Canada, but we also have excellent control programs by the provinces that manage the bee health and ensure that these, for example, small hive beetles, do not spread to other parts of country or within the province.
Would there be opportunity to do assessments on individual states?
So that depends on the on if a state has a different disease prevalence and a disease status. There are opportunities to look at a zone, but however, it needs significant scientific information and assessment in terms of, again, going to the prevalence of the disease, when they had last outbreaks, what kind of surveillance they have in place, what kind of natural barriers that is present that doesn't allow any of the disease to come into that state. So the number of scientific parameters and risk mitigation options that CFI will look if there is scientific evidence provided to us.
Let's go to Miss Taylor Rouge. Miss Taylor Roy.
And thank you very much to our witnesses for being here today, and our neighbors in the States. And there's been a lot of discussion about import of bees to Canada from different countries. And I'd actually like to focus on why bee mortality is so high and what's happening. And I'd like to address some of my questions to you, Dr. Hart, regarding, in particular, the use of neonics. And the work, because I know it's been studied, it's been reassessed in 2019, and we're kind of monitoring to see what's happening. But clearly, I would imagine the science here in the EU is very similar in terms of the effects of neonics, and yet it was banned in the EU, and it's not been here. So I'm wondering, what is the difference in our assessment approach that has led to one conclusion in the EU and another here?
I won't speak to how the EU made their decision, but our assessment was a risk-based assessment that looked at environmental exposure and effects for bees. It followed the new pollinator risk assessment framework that we had developed in conjunction with the US EPA, so it has a large data component. We looked at both laboratory and basic studies, but we also had many higher tier studies, and we looked at information from the public literature as well as registrant submitted data. And the higher tier studies look at more realistic effects. So we had information on pollen and nectar residues in crops that were treated in Canada, so the actual levels measured. We had semi-field studies, so that included tunnel studies where you put bees in a tunnel and they're exposed in a realistic situation to crops that are treated. And we had feeding studies where, they're in a natural environment and they are exposed through a known concentration in their feeding solution to different test doses of neonics, and we looked for sensitive effects measures on that. And we looked at that the studies were over a long exposure period, so it was over like a long 6-week exposure period, which is a lot of the growing season, and then they were continued to be monitored through the fall and through overwintering, and we looked at whether the colony health in the spring as well. So we had all of that information, and so and we also had sensitive information from public literature looking at other types of bees, such as bumblebees, and used all of those effects measured. So in 2019, as you know, we published our final decision on that. We did remove a lot of uses for high pollinator attractive crops to protect bees. We put other mitigations in place, such as restricting the timing of application, so you could not apply during bloom for many pollinator attractive crops, and other restrictions such as some pollinator attractive crops you could only apply post-bloom. So we put all of those mitigations in place to protect bees, and we kept registered products with mitigation in place where risk was acceptable. Now, the difference between the EU was, they have different uses and things as well, but they did not necessarily have the same pollinator residue levels in pollen and nectar that we had in North America from those crops. And to my knowledge, they did not look at the same field level studies. So the long study that I described with feeding, they did not have that as part of their package when they considered their risk profile.
And I'm wondering, Mr. Winter mentioned his concern about the kind of interaction of different chemicals that might occur in a hive from bees bringing in different chemicals, obviously. Have you looked at that issue and examined what has happened not only cumulatively but interactively from these different chemicals?
When it's a challenging area looking at multiple chemical exposure for bees. We do look at that when you have a product that has, for example, 2 different pesticides in it. We would look at that together because we know it's being applied together. And there has been research where, for example, where it's shown that certain insecticides and fungicides, when they're together, they increase toxicity. So we are able, when that research is available, we're able to put protections on the pesticide labels, such as don't tank mix these products together. And beyond that, we rely on work with our partners such as Agriculture Canada and other researchers to kind of do the research to determine where these interactions might be happening.
Has there been any testing done of actually inside the hives to see what chemicals have been found like interacting when they bring the pollen back? Because that's obviously bees can't read labels, so they're not going to be looking at the labels and saying, "Oh, we're not going to go there and there." So they're not going to have that same information that you're putting labeling on products.
So we're at time, but Ms. Howard, if you'd like to have, what's that? You're at time right now, Ms. Taylor-Roy. But Ms. Howard, if you'd like to answer the question succinctly, please.
I would just like to say that was a program that AFC was looking at with monitoring colony-wide health across Canada. So my colleague Steve Purnell could provide more information on that. But it's more of a research question in terms of monitoring what's happening with colony health across Canada and getting that information.
Could I just ask that information be sent to us?
Yeah, certainly we can make sure that does happen. I'll work to my clerk. Monsieur Parent, 2 minutes 30 secondes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Perron, for 2.5 minutes. Ms. Hart, with regards to the evaluation of neonicotinoids, I know that they are more heavily regulated in Quebec. If you compare with other provinces that still uses the neonicotinoids, do you note any differences, especially with regards to bee deaths?
No, thank you for the question. We have not received differences in incident reports, so that would be, I think, the mechanism largely where we would see a difference among provinces. We receive low levels of bee incident reports across all the provinces in Canada, and there hasn't been a difference in reports of incidents from Quebec compared to other provinces.
Puis au niveau des récoltes aussi?
And what about with regards to harvests?
Comme vous savez, au Québec, il y a un agronome.
As you know, in Quebec, somebody certifies whether or not there is a need or not, but we have not noticed a difference. Thank you. I imagine that these evaluations are continuous rather. Ms. Taylor-Roy has been asking questions about experimenting in the hives. I think that that's an interesting direction. Is that something that you're thinking of doing eventually? We do try to monitor what's happening all the time. You may have heard about this. We received money from the government to explore how we can improve things, and we'd like to have a more systematic monitoring mechanism. We do, of course, have other mechanisms. We have international contacts. There's some literature, and so on. Back to Ms. Roux. With regards to the evaluations, according to what I understand, one of the reasons why we reject the import of bee packages from the United States is because there is no law in the United States that is actually uniform. It's quite separate. I believe that I understood that correctly. If that's the case, could we not evaluate with a separate state the possibility of doing some imports, especially the states that are bordering Canada and that are in more similar similar climate zone? When we do the risk evaluation or risk acceptability, and we have done that for bee packages coming from the United States, the risk was non-negligible for the dangers that have been mentioned. In order to ensure that we can have a risk mitigation measures, my question actually, Mr. Perron, I'm sorry, it's time. You said you'd give me a bit more time earlier. No, I'm sorry. Your time is up. Please respect the president. Thank you, Mr. Perron. Mr. McGregor, for 2 minutes, 30 seconds, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to turn my questions to Mr. McKinney from the National Association of State Departments for Agriculture. Sir, in your opening statement, you had talked about needing more tools in the toolbox, the need to fund additional research to combat problems, I guess, associated with the fact that some treatments that we're using we're seeing resistance to those current treatments. In your mind, where do you see some of the most beneficial research occurring in additional treatments? Do you see, what's the state of development of other chemical products? Is there any promising research showing maybe biological agents that might help? Or is there any promising research into breeding that may help bees develop beneficial traits to allow them to be resistant to some of the pests that they are having to deal with? Anything that you can help guide our committee through on this, please?
Thank you for the question. I'll be brief because I think Mr. Winter might be able to help with some of the specifics. Broadly, we are pursuing, as NASDA and many of our colleagues across agriculture are pushing for additional research at USDA through part of our Farm Bill. It's been many, many years since that has seen an increase, and we're seeing the need for that across many areas, including bee health. Having been in the industry, it is usually companies pursuing additional labels that gets this. And I think you're well aware that minor use crops, minor use needs are often a very, very difficult decision because of the sensitivities, the liabilities, and all that goes with that. So this is why we're at a pinch point with these 3 primary products and a variety of other related products. We are hoping that our university system can keep going on this, and they are very active in some cases on bee health. Certainly it depends on the location. I think companies are there. We have an onslaught of biological products that are coming that could be applicable to many, many, many uses. And most of those would be insecticides because that's what most people would like to get rid of. So insecticide research with biologicals is a key one. I can't answer the specific question, but I think generally speaking, that's the direction that we're hoping at NASDA, at my level, we'd like to pursue.
Thank you very much, both of you. We'll now go to our final round, so 5 minutes for the Conservatives, 5 minutes for the Liberals. I think, Mr. Barlow, you're going to kick us off.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll split my time with my colleague, Mr. Lahou. Maybe just to CFIA, I think we've all been talking about this, but as my colleague, Mr. Drouin, was saying, we're basing a lot of these decisions on information that may or may not be outdated. And I think one of the recommendations that we may come up with this is that a new assessment is done as quickly as possible to reevaluate the dangers of importing bees from the United States. Can you give me a timeline on whether that's possible, or is that in the works to do that, or is that like a regular thing that's done on a certain schedule?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Like I mentioned in the opening remarks, we are reviewing the call for information scientific data we have solicited. We have received over 55 scientific documents, publications, opinions, and comments. We are reviewing that. In the next 8 weeks, we will make a determination whether we will go ahead and proceed with a new risk assessment or not.
And just as my colleague, Mr. Viersen, mentioned, in talking to our American colleagues, so maybe I'll ask Mr. Winters first. As the CFIA here had mentioned, we're importing bees from Ukraine, Italy, New Zealand, Australia, and other countries. Does it not make more sense? And if we really wanted to keep a lid on importing pests, would it not make more sense to have a North American strategy where it's easier to keep monitoring those diseases or those pests rather than importing bees from farther reaches of the globe?
I think it's very important actually to work that way. I think in the United States, I think we are set up to inspect some of these companies that could potentially ship bees into Canada, and there's no reason why we couldn't, meet the requirements that are needed to enter Canada. I think it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned to try to work within North America.
Mr. McKinney, what are your thoughts?
The answer is yes. We have been looking and looking and looking for more ways to interface with your ministers of ag at the provincial level. I think there's already a healthy relationship at the federal level, and that needs to continue. But this is something we would welcome and embrace. In fact, might even talk about when we gather in Saskatchewan in about a month or two.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'll concede the rest of my time to Mr. Lehoux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for the Minister of Agriculture. Among our witnesses, we've had people who were working on finding somebody to take over their beekeeping business. It's been mentioned that there is a lot of difficulty finding anybody to take over because the programs are not adapted to beekeeping. It does not encourage anybody to continue in this vein. Could there not be any modifications to agri-investments to help people who want to take over?
Mr. Purnall, that question I believe was directed to you at the Department of Agriculture, unless I'm wrong.
Well, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada is a big government department, and I do work for Science and Technology branch, so I can speak authoritatively to technical answers with bees, but not really agri-stability programs. So I'm afraid I can't specifically answer your question. Unfortunately, you would have to go to some of my colleagues in other branches of the department. But it is a valid concern, and certainly succession in agriculture, including beekeeping, is important to the country and in terms of continuing on these operations.
Parfait. Peut-être au niveau de soit l'ARLA.
And so with regards to research on improving genetics, and we know that that's what it's going to take, what progress is being made? Is there any progress with regards to research? Because we have to learn to maybe develop genetics here in Canada.
I would respectfully point to my colleague Steve Purnell, who would be better able to answer that question.
Well, that question I can't answer. Thank you for your interest. Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada has been involved in projects developing markers for breeding bees. These would be markers based on the proteins expressed by honeybees or their markers in their genome and their genetics. So we've been working with many labs across Canada in developing markers for better selectively breeding bees. So we have been successful in concluding some of these projects and trying to help introduce them to the industry. And we're currently involved in projects with our university collaborators to look at also markers of stress that may help us more real-time diagnose what's actually happening in a bee colony rather than looking at a dead colony and trying to figure out what has happened. So I would say there is progress on this front. I think the aim is certainly to move bee breeding more into the realm of other major animal systems like cattle or swine. And through AAFC and certainly our collaborators at Canadian universities, we have worked on marker selection projects for bees.
Thank you very much to you both. That's time. Yeah, we're 45 seconds over. Thank you very much. Ms. Valdez, over to you, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll direct my questions to Mr. Winter. Earlier you mentioned how bees will mix chemicals within their hives. So what measures do you have in place in the U.S. to limit the spread of pests and disease affecting bees?
Well, we do have inspections vary from state to state. Some states, of course, work harder to inspect the bees. The United States government, about 20 years ago, we started a pollen analysis program in which we sample hives yearly to determine what chemicals are coming into the hives. 20 years ago, there was 2 or 3 coming into pollen. Now there's upwards of 20, or more. But it's important to understand that those particular chemicals are not showing up in honey. They are showing up in the bee bread in which they feed larvae. So it's not a risk to humans per se. So they're not really looking at it real close. And I think it's a bigger problem as far as bee health. And it definitely needs more research and more science for sure.
Thank you. You just touched on my second question, which is around what measures are put in place by your government or even industry in the U.S. to prevent or at least track movements of bee packages between states or between the groups of states when the bees are traveling.
Well, I can only speak for my own particular business, but I get inspected in all 3 states that I go to. I get inspected in New York State, I get inspected in Florida, and I get inspected when my bees go to California. So I think it's more rigorous than most people understand. As I think the last it was to my understanding that 29 states have some sort of registration and inspection program, and I know that it's higher now because I know New York State has started a registration program. So since the pollinator protection plans were enabled, the states have done a better job following pollinators in general than they had in the past.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll direct my next questions to the Department of Health. We know your mandate that PMRA applies modern evidence-based scientific approaches to assess whether the health and environmental risks of pesticides are acceptable or if the products have value. Can you elaborate on your scientific-based approach? We've talked about it a few times today. And if our current regulation in Canada needs to be strengthened to support that or to maybe limit any risks for health and the environment.
I'll ask my colleague to talk about the risk assessment. I can supplement afterwards.
Sure. Are you asking specifically about the bee risk assessment, or in general?
The bee risk.
The bee one. Okay. So as mentioned, we put a new risk assessment framework in place in 2014, and we developed that jointly with the U.S. EPA and the California Department of Pesticide Regulation. And it has a new that risk assessment is done for all pesticides that would be used where there would be bee exposure. So that's all outdoor use pesticides as well as greenhouse use pesticides, and it's every type of pesticide that we use the framework for. And we have an initial screening level risk assessment, which now has more robust data that we require. So it includes a number of laboratory studies for adults and larval bees and acute and chronic risk. And it looks at both contact and dietary exposure. So contact being if the bee would be sprayed or if it's exposed to dried residues on plants, and the dietary exposure is through pollen and nectar. And in the initial screening, we have a way to estimate the expected exposure on the pollen and nectar from the application rate that the pesticide is used at. So that is the initial screen that is done for all pesticides. And then if there is a potential risk identified, we can also ask for higher tier data, which, as I mentioned before, includes tunnel studies, feeding studies, field studies, and more realistic information on the exposure data, so the levels of pesticide in pollen and nectar that are actually measured instead of the conservative estimate that's done initially. And then as well, we also consider other factors such as agronomic considerations. So is the crop something that is attractive to pollinators and that pollinators will be foraging on? Or, for example, is it something that's harvested before it blooms, so there will not be pollinator exposure through pollen and nectar? And we look at the risk mitigation options as we're determining whether or not risk is acceptable. So is there risk mitigation that we can put in place, such as restricting timing during bloom, pre-bloom for different scenarios, and for seed treatments, do you have to address dust considerations when planting treated seed, for example? So it's a very robust risk assessment method now that we have that looks at both adults and larvae. So larvae considering exposure when the adults bring pollen and nectar back to the hive, and we look at that. And as well, we take into account native pollinators. So we don't just consider honeybees, we also consider native bees such as bumblebees and solitary bees in our assessment.
Thank you, Ms. Hart. Thank you, Ms. Valdez. Thank you, Ms. Hart, for that very robust description of all the work that you guys do. Colleagues, that brings us to the end. I do want to just take one quick opportunity to ask a question with CFIA and PMRA here. I know certainly in dealing dealing with my agriculture producers at home in Nova Scotia, one of the things they talk about often is competitiveness. And I think I'm aware that I don't know if there's an actual provision within your legislative statute that talks about that, but I think about things like S6, which is before the House right now, which I believe allows and opens the door for both of your agencies to start considering foreign recognition. Can you tell this committee what is being done on certain, whether or not it's crop protection products or certain seeds through CFIA, where there is demonstrably strong scientific processes from other jurisdictions to create expedited pathways in Canada? Mr. Bissonnette, for example, you talked about you really have to wait until someone actually comes to apply to Canada. But, you know, the evidence that I think many of our colleagues would have at this committee is that many major manufacturers would start in the United States, they'd start in Europe, they'd start in larger markets before they even get to Canada, and then we still have a couple-year process by the time it lands in our lap. How do we close that gap for competitiveness, and is there ways that we can use the existing science of other agencies that we trust to expedite our own processes? What work are you guys doing in that domain? Maybe I'll start with CFIA and then go to PMRA.
Not qualified to talk about seeds, but in general, CFIA has excellent regulatory cooperation with many of the jurisdictions that does assessments similar to CFIA. We also have international standard setting bodies, like for food, it is Codex Alimentarius. For animal health, it's World Organization of Animal Health, and for plant, it's IPPC. So we work through those organizations, but also bilaterally and also with like-minded partners in terms of exchanging regulatory practices, in terms of their assessments, including risk assessment, and share best practices among ourselves on a very regular basis.
Okay, and PMRA?
For PMRA, I would say we're very strong internationally. We work a lot with EPA. We actually get most chemicals first here in Canada and the U.S., sometimes a bit after the U.S. because of our history of doing joint reviews with the U.S. My substantive position is as Chief Registrarist. I'm responsible for the pre-market. I'm the head of the delegation at OECD, and a lot of my colleagues around the table are quite jealous of the relationship we have with the U.S., and we get the products here often first because of that big market that we have and the importance of having both sides having the same chemicals. And we still have an active CUSMA working group with the U.S. and Mexico to make sure that that competitiveness is considered.
Just quickly, will S6 actually allow you to draw different processes than you have now?
I'm not familiar enough with all the changes, so we'll have to take that.
I don't want to take any more time from my colleagues, but from where I respectfully sit, and I appreciate there are existing processes, the more work we can do in that domain, I think really matters for farmers in terms of them having the tools to be competitive with their international partners. But I want to thank you for coming here before the committee. So to our folks and friends at CFIA, to PMRA, to the Department of Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and to our American friends, thank you for taking the time. I think your perspective was certainly welcome, and we appreciate you joining the committee. So to Mr. Winter with the American Beekeepers Federation, and to NASDA, Mr. McKinney, thanks so much, and enjoy Saskatchewan when you're up there in a few days, or a few months. All right, colleagues, we're going to suspend for just 5 minutes, so please don't go far. I want to be able to get our committee work done. Mr. Lewis, please jump over as quick as you can, and we're going to get started. Thanks.
you.